final panel discussion of procurement and supply chain live sustainability. This is the Carbon Management Forum. So let me introduce our panel of guests. On my far side, we have Pat Jurai, Group Head of Procurement Energy at Sky. We have Chris Mattock, Global Head of Sustainability for Infrastructure at Mace. And closest to me, we welcome back Heidi Barnard, who can't get enough at this stage currently, the Head of Sustainability, NHS Supply Chain. And this is the Carbon Management Forum. A warm welcome to my guests, please. Okay, well, let's start with the current context, the here and now, where we are at this time. And Pat, I'll start with you as you're first on my list. Apologies. Right. For you, is there enough direct focus on carbon management at the moment as part of the ESG bigger picture, if you can call it that?
So, hello everyone. Thank you for having us. Thank you for having us on the panel. So, answer to the question, I think yes. I think it started from we were all thinking about how we measure, how we set our targets, looking at a high-level strategy. We're now moving very much from the what do we need to do into the how we deliver it. And that's now where we're turning the dial and looking at things like sustainability initiatives, working in the supply chain. So I think, yes, it is. And I think there's more we should be focusing on. But I'll talk about that in the future. # spoiler.
Part that one. I like that. The briefing went well, clearly. Chris?
Yes, I think there is a big focus on carbon within ESG, certainly within Mace, and we're a construction consultancy company, so most of the stuff we do is outside our own company, and that's where we have the biggest influence. But inside, every role has carbon training. We have our own carbon targets. We have external carbon targets to save our clients. So it does take enough. It is proportional within that space. Is ESG enough of a focus generally? No, I don't think so.
Heidi?
It's really interesting because usually I get asked, is carbon too big a slice of the pie? Because often we talk about carbon as a proxy for everything. So absolutely, I think it is, but I think that we need to dial up some of the other ESG factors as well.
It's interesting to be whether it's a glass half full or half empty question. I think I was somewhere in between there. Let's look at the challenges and the barriers when it comes to carbon management here. And Chris, I'll start with you if I can on this. For you, what are the most common barriers that businesses are facing when trying to measure and manage carbon emissions within their supply chains? What do you see?
I think, and it's one of the reasons I'm sat here on a procurement stage rather than on a sustainability stage where I normally am and feel much more comfortable. But one of the biggest barriers we see amongst our clients generally is that they set their targets, they set their goals, they have their ambitions, and then they complete their program and are surprised when they haven't achieved them. And that's because they haven't taken their supply chain on the same journey as them. And they may be mature, they may be measuring their own impacts, they may know their scope 1 and 2, but their supply chain might not be that mature. So it's getting the data, number one, that's the bare minimum, and then it's actually reducing carbon, which again is something that's often overlooked. Understanding it is great, but you actually need to drive that reduction too. And I think that one of the biggest parts of procurement that's often overlooked is that you can't just go out and demand these things from the market. You have to go out and help the market understand what you want, help them be able to deliver what you want, and prepare them for when you do want to demand that. And doing that, I think you leave a legacy in the industry well after your project's finished that's going to drive the whole industry forward as well.
That has been a real theme over the last couple of days of that help and support going through the tiers. That's come through loud and clear. Heidi, your thoughts? Building
on that, really, the barrier that we see, particularly thinking about for us, it's all about our scope 3, is overwhelm. So often a lot of our suppliers, where they're not on the journey already, it's the first thing you come across is they're overwhelmed and don't know where to start. So the barrier is knowing how to break it down into bite-sized chunks. How do you eat the elephant? Well, one bit at a time. So again, part of the thing I spoke about in the session earlier was around how do you break that down? How do you understand what it is your supply chain needs support with, and kind of breadcrumb it for them, and not expect perfection tomorrow. But this is a journey. It's a very overused cliche, but it's what's the next step? Just what's the next step? Just keep going.
Pat.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything you guys have said. I think it's absolutely that. So just thinking about the Sky context in our own story, is Sky have set since 2020 a SBTI a firm target of a 50% absolute reduction in carbon. We all go around saying it, and there's a reason for that, is we all know what we're doing, we all now can start measuring it, and then we have to absolutely be engaging with our supply chain, with our colleagues on, you have a starter policy, this is the target, this is where we want to get to. Then you start to put in things like policies around that. Very clear, this is what we will do, this is what we won't do. We are not going to have any more suppliers that don't use renewable energy. We're going to set targets here, we're going to set targets there. Then you bring that down to what does that mean for, I'm a procurement person at the end of the day. I want to do a deal, I want to save money, I want to do the right thing for my business. And there are opportunities in that, so just slightly the flip of that coin, is there's opportunities in the supply chain with that too. So if you can be very clear about that, and you send all of your fantastic deal doers out there who are looking at their categories of spend and are planning for this year, 3 years, and then 5 years, by having that clarity, you can then get to that end goal. And it is stepped. You don't do it. It can't happen overnight. It won't happen overnight. And we have to help our supply chain do that. And that particularly sits with large companies, large spend. When we've got the large spend, it trickles down with the larger suppliers and then trickle that down into the slightly smaller companies and help them to get there as well.
Well, let's stick with that for a second. As anyone who's been in here over the last couple of days will have noticed, I do go off on tangents every so often. I loved your expression breadcrumbing there, and I'm going to hang on to that. When we say we need to help the smallest, the suppliers further down the tiers, how do you do that? How do you lay out those breadcrumbs? Heidi, I'll start with you on that.
Yeah, so the first thing for us is about market signalling. It's about kind of setting out your own strategic ambition and your own strategic intent and what you're going to break that down into. So I talked earlier about the supply roadmap the NHS has. That's all about market signalling. That's not saying that we're not going to work with you tomorrow if you're not on the journey with us. It's saying actually by 2030 we will, which is giving you time to get there. So it's about market signalling, and then it's about putting resources in place to support it. So the reason my team exists is in part to help our suppliers achieve the targets, to understand where the gaps are, understand what they're struggling with, and support them with webinars, resources, whatever it is, to bring them along with us.
Pat?
SRM, right? Supplier relationship management this is really where those gaps in SRM are going to start to show. We need to really be doing the bread and butter SRM, and thinking with the breadcrumbing example is working with your supply chain. And also we have a lot of large companies tend to work with larger suppliers, but there's tier 2, tier 3 and suppliers down the supply chain. So we can signal to the larger suppliers who can very quickly make those changes and are probably on their own journey of decarbonisation and clarity and transparency in the supply chain, etc. But then they are then working that down their supply chain and putting that onus on the larger companies, on the tier 1s, to start doing that down their supply chain too.
And to jump onto that, so we've recently just had a little bit of a rejig around in terms of structure within our organisation. My team now sits within supply management.
There you go.
Chris?
Yeah, so I mean, just from a slightly different angle, we kind of come into projects where we've got a big challenge and a short time frame, and we suddenly go out to the market and we demand a lot from companies, small, medium, large, and we demand they do it in a different way to the way that they've been doing it for decades. We've got to stop doing that. Time, I think, is really critical, time and information. So providing them the time to prepare for what you want, providing them the time to establish their own supply chains, particularly for perhaps low carbon materials, to establish not just carbon, but the social value, the biodiversity aspects of it, so that when you do come to ask it of them, it doesn't drive up the cost, right? Because that's the other barrier that I didn't mention, is cost, or certainly perceived cost. And if you do give time and you do give help, then you don't eliminate competition when it comes to it, and you don't drive up the price.
We were speaking a moment ago about Scope 3 and the complexity of tackling Scope 3 emissions too. Often makes up the largest portion of the carbon footprint. Pat, I'll start with you. How do you go about tackling that complexity? I know that's a question that could fill an entire panel, but I'll give you a couple of minutes on it.
Oh gosh, data, right? So it's measurement, it's being willing to keep growing on that measurement and incrementally changing that measurement. It's understanding how your business operates. I think that's a really basic thing as well. It's large businesses are very complicated. Just in our own context, I describe Sky as 7 different businesses in one. We're like a contact center. We've got an engineer fleet. We've got a technology operation. We've got huge buildings. We've got all of these different things. We've got a retail arm. Oh, have I forgotten one? Who have I forgotten? Oh, no. All right, sorry. But we've got so many different businesses. All of them have different drivers, different suppliers. And understanding that then helps you figure out, oh, actually, they're delivering, our freight is being delivered like this. So it's almost taking that kind of life cycle assessment and applying that in the indirect space too.
Chris?
I think, data's key, but also having faith and confidence in that data and having that data in a standardized way. So again, across the construction industry, we generally look at the whole life cycle cost of an asset, and that's done, it's almost less and less, but it's a bit of the wild, wild west of data out there at the moment. So having standards to conform to, so the RICS has a standard for whole life carbon assessment in a project, having that independently verified and using things like environmental product declarations, which are becoming more and more common, and then building into your procurement requirements the way in which you want to receive that data, so you don't have to worry about a supply chain all giving you the information in different ways and having to integrate that with your own systems. I would say the confidence in the data, the standardization of the data, and getting that data in a way that integrates well with your systems.
Heidi.
I'm going to be a bit controversial, not the data. I get, I'm a hobby horse. Yes, we do need some data, but we've become obsessed with data, and it's a means, not an end. Mm-hmm. What we want action. We want to do something. We want something to be different. So data's great, but is it driving action? Is the data going to change what you're going to do tomorrow, next week, next year? If it's not, that's not the driver. How is the information, what you know, helping you make a difference and take action tomorrow? Or is there information that you already have about actually what to do? And it's about get that first step, do something. We can worry about getting better data as we go along, but do something.
I don't think that's too controversial at all. I think that's exactly what we want to get to.
I would agree on the doing something. Certainly when we look at our projects, the doing something is the main bit, but it's getting that data to understand which are the big wins you can get, and what's kind of a distraction, I think.
That's what I was going to say. I think the data, why you want the data is to help you prioritize. Otherwise, it gets very difficult. You've got just to see, it's like it's trying to drink from a fire hose. It's impossible. But if you know where your big hits are, you can do the basics, right? Like renewable energy. We know we want to do these things. You don't need data to tell you to do that. That's pretty straightforward. The data helps you prioritize and say, actually, I'm going to spend my limited budgets and my limited money on the things that are going to have the biggest impact. In order to do that, the data helps. And that's how we use the data.
Just sticking with the data, though, one thing that has come up over the last 2 days is the relationship of data with the supplier, and suppliers maybe not understanding why they need to provide that data and whether it's useful. Do you think there's a lot of onus to explain why you need certain things from suppliers? Chris, I think you were next to start on this. Do you think there's a real onus there to explain to suppliers why you're after particular data and the particular benefits it could bring to both parties?
Yeah, I think that needs to be clearly explained. I mean, we construct projects with a carbon target in sight, and we aim to beat that carbon target. And the reason we want the data is so that we can see where that carbon is, so we can target it. If we're building a runway, then we need to know, should we be looking at the asphalt? Should we be looking at the concrete, the steel, the electricity for the ground lighting? And I think it's important that not only do our supply chain understand that that's why we're asking for it, but they understand that the big bits are what we're going to ask their professional expertise to help us reduce. And perhaps, this is probably going into the future a bit, but it does happen now, incentivizing them to focus on the reduction of carbon in those big areas.
Heidi?
Yeah, I think to build on that, it's the why and the what. So it's the why you want it and the kind of the hearts and minds why. But then what you're going to do with it, and I kind of keep getting GPDR training in my head when I'm thinking about this. If you're not going to use the data, why are you asking for it? So being really specific about the data you're asking for, and not the fire hydrant kind of analogy of just asking for everything, but actually you're only wanting these bits. So that for me is the kind of the crux of it.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree to that. But it's also, we need to have our own data house in order. So we need to know what we're doing. Like, do we understand how much we're spending to some extent, but that data is really hard to manage. But it's using a very similar kind of, how do you manage spend data? Let's use carbon in the same way. And then you start thinking about things like carbon accounting and carbon pricing and things like that internally. If we can explain why we're doing something, then it really helps the supplier. But we use a lot of our own. Oh, we tried this, it was really hard for us. Let us help you, let's work with you to do that. So that's part of why we do it.
And I think it should become a more common metric. So we know why we want to know how much something costs. We know why we want to know how long something is going to take. In the same vein, we should start to want to know what the carbon impact is going to be on the change or the risk or anything we do, I think.
Can I just add one more thing, sorry? I was just thinking about, so recently it's come out that the biggest growth area in the UK economy is renewables, and it's solar, and it's such a huge area, it's a huge opportunity. So one of the things we do also talk to our supply chain about is how us doing this, you can take this know-how and offer it everywhere to any other client, because they'll also need this eventually, and especially working with industry partners in our kind of spheres like media or tech, we're all asking for the same stuff, maybe slightly in a different format, but it's all the same thing. And so it's selling, it's also, I say selling, it's explaining that why it's actually really beneficial for you to do this. And I'm sorry if we're going to be the trigger for that, and that's happened a lot at Sky. We're the first supplier to ask the question, a customer to ask the question, but then they've used that going forward, and it's been super helpful for them, and they've really valued it.
Where I want to go next is looking at some global challenges, and don't worry, I'm not going to get political. That's not what we're here to do. The challenges of aligning carbon management goals across what are now global supply chains, but across different regulatory environments. What advice would you all have about how to monitor, measure, and cope with those global challenges? Heidi, I'll start with you. Sorry, I do apologise.
That's right.
What are your thoughts there?
So, the NHS, from a context point of view, where I work, we were the first healthcare system in the world to put net zero targets in place. But we are now, but part of the role what we've seen in that is actually we're a leader in this space, so lead. And bring other healthcare systems around the world on the journey with us. So we spend a lot of time talking and collaborating with healthcare systems around the globe on that very thing, to make sure that we are aligning so that the global markets that actually serve all of us know which way to turn, and we're not having to do something slightly different in each territory. Again, for those of you familiar with the healthcare sector, most of our supply chains are international, and when the big guys are supplying us, they're also supplying from the same factories often, most of Europe and Africa. So why wouldn't you try and align?
Pat?
Yeah, I think it's that. It's alignment, it's simplicity, it's trying to be very clear about what it is we need. So again, I think it starts again from that policy, what it is we want, and then we ask the same questions and try to at least make it make sense in our context, and then that then helps us try to create an even playing field and measure it appropriately. I think we can get really bogged down in all the different kind of regulations, but at the end of the day, if we're really clear and have a really good explanation of how we've gotten there, that's kind of how we're going about it. I think just, again, not making the data become the reason we stop doing something, just keep going. We'll get the data eventually.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably something I come up with the least in the group, because we deliver specific projects globally, and I think the challenge we face is probably more around the appetite of the client to know, and within the UK, that is growing, and it's grown a huge amount over the last 10 years, the same in Europe. In different regions around the world, without getting geopolitical, that appetite can be higher or lower, A, to understand, and B, to reduce, which is what we really want. So the regulation that's drifting in that does help us do that, certain jurisdictions in the UK will require carbon modelling to be done before a construction programme, is super helpful. but globally, I would say it's quite immature compared to the regulation that affects the corporate side of things.
That is a fascinating sort of perspective on that in terms of the local appetite for that. That's something I'd not considered before. So that's a fascinating way to approach that. Just before we leave the global challenges, what one specifically for you, Heidi, from your presentation a few moments ago before the networking break, we saw the big spike over the pandemic. Any reflections there on the global challenges of the pandemic there and the knock-ons that has on sustainability? Because you just had to look at that graph, if many of you remember, just to see what a massive change that was. Any reflections? As long as we don't need to sit down and sort of hug it out afterwards, it's up to you.
So I think one of the things that we talk a lot about, particularly in the NHS, is that the sustainability crisis, the climate crisis, is a healthcare crisis. So we are ever more likely to see more pandemics. So the kind of at the point of when COVID happened, it had been about 100 years since the last pandemic. The predictions for when the next one will be are significantly sooner than that. So how do we make sure we're prepared? How do we make sure we learn the lessons and put in place sustainable approaches to that very real threat that we live with? And it goes to the heart of some of the broader aims of how we manage healthcare and population health. And if we can be better at that generally, all of it drives better outcomes for patients, better outcomes in terms of disease prevention, but also means in the long term, when we do face this again, we'll be in a better position to manage it, not only from a sustainability point of view, but from a resilience point of view.
I've got a sneaky suspicion there's a question you've had to answer more than one or two times, so I apologise for that. Let's move
in on something.
Sorry, feel free.
I think now it's an absolute tangent, but I think it's interesting, is resilience and climate resilience. So, especially in construction, being something when you're looking at a global project around the globe, we're looking at that, and I think all companies should be looking at that, is how climate risks are now going to start to become operational risks, supply chain risks. And how do you diversify your supply chain in that very, particularly from, and I think we're all learning our lessons from COVID, like how quickly do we have to change the supply chain, find different opportunities. But I think it's very interesting in the construction context because we have to have buildings that can withstand climate shock. It's very interesting in the fast-moving, consumables supply chain because of how quickly we needed to pivot and find different sources of product. So it's just an interesting point around carbon isn't just carbon, it's also we have to start looking at it in line with that kind of resilience and risk mitigation aspect too.
No, I'm quite happy for us to go out on tangents. That's absolutely what happens on this stage. Let's dig more into the solutions because time is starting to run away from us a little bit. And what I want to look at is tech. It's regularly a conversation on this stage over the last 2 days. And I'd be interested to get all of your perspectives on this about how much of a help tech is and different solutions in managing carbon and what is proving to be the most useful. We've been talking about things wanting to be useful for action. I can't remember who I went to. I think it's Chris starting on this one, I think. Your thoughts?
Okay, yeah. I suppose when you ask about tech, then the conversation is often around data and how you handle it. But in construction, I would say the tech is really around how we reduce it and the emerging materials that make a big impact on global carbon emissions. The built environment is 40% of global carbon emissions. Steel is about 10%. Concrete is about 10%. So finding novel ways to reduce those through alternative materials or alternative methods of construction is going to have a huge impact. Renewable energy is going to have a huge impact. So not giving you the kind of software answer, which I think for what we do helps, but won't have nearly the impact that doing things in a different way to the way we've been doing them for hundreds of years is going to make a big difference. It's
still absolutely relevant. It's still doing different, essentially. Heidi?
Absolutely going to build on that. The tech is an enabler when it comes to data. When we think about impact in the healthcare space, we have so many touch points, and when we think about the long-term trends in healthcare, when we think about what the NHS strategy is going to say over the next few months, the shift in how we manage population health and making it a well society, not treating illness culture, but then also how we enable healthcare at home, the move to more consumerized digital healthcare and monitoring. We all have got smartwatches on our wrist. What's the power of that? What's that going to be able to tell us about our own health and how we manage our own health? That is where I think tech is going to be a really interesting space, in a really interesting place within the healthcare sector.
Pat?
I'm going to pivot to something slightly different. So data is data, great. AI will be either the death of us or will be the solution, don't know. But my primary focus is energy and decarbonisation of built environment of the organisation as a whole. We need to be looking at all of those different programmes and trying to decarbonise as we go. I think looking at things like hydrogen, looking at different fueling, just trying to be really flexible about how we do something, but also, which I have to say on every panel or every talking opportunity, the cheapest energy is the electricity you don't use. So please, let's efficiency. The data around where we're overusing, where we're wasting, is going to really drive efficiency. And then you expand that across the grid, across the country, across the globe. We're probably wasting loads everywhere all the time and not realizing it, and just food waste and all of those other things. So that's where I think data and technology should really enable us to get more efficient.
Yeah, I think it was described on this stage yesterday as the green gold. It's the thing. Let's not reinvent the wheel when there's things that we can do straight away. I will go to audience questions in just a moment, but where I'd like to go to next before that is a bit about what you were saying a moment ago, Pat, about SRM. Let's talk about supplier relationships and how we get the best out of them when it comes to helping manage carbon. I know yesterday there were discussions, say John from DP World was talking about some of the financial incentives or penalties they have for using different systems which help improve their sustainability goals. Heidi, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts? How do we get the best out of those relationships? Is it incentivizing? Is it guidance? What works for you?
I mean, it's a bit of all. It's not going to be one silver bullet. It's the whole plethora of how the tools in your arsenal to manage your suppliers. But it's also about, it's all about that relationship. What kind of relationship do you need with which part of your supply chain? When we talk about SRM, supplier relationship management, you don't treat all of your suppliers the same because they don't all have the same role or part to play. And it's getting more into that, really segmenting and understanding your suppliers and what relationship you need with them. Who are your strategic suppliers? Who is it you actually need a partnership with and collaboration with? And who are your transactional suppliers that you're never going to, no matter how much money you spend with them, you're going to be a very small, insignificant part for them. So it's really getting into the detail of that and interweaving this as just part of your BAU of that approach to really deliver what you need to deliver, be it in sustainability or be it in any part of your organisational needs.
Thank you. Pat?
Yep, going back to basics, right? With segmentation of your supply base, using sustainability goals are just another thing that we audit, just another thing that you have to do. And the more that we make it part of the BAU, the better. That gets you that data, that starts that market signalling, and it then really helps us create that value chain greening, right? It's just very simple. I think we overcomplicate this stuff, and we don't need to.
That's fine by me. Chris?
I mean, going back to an earlier point, getting them involved early gives them the chance to give you their best. But secondly, they know their business better than we know their business. They know what's possible. They know how to innovate. So having a way to encourage innovation, incentivization is great, but certainly from my perspective, a lot of clients are reluctant to put money down for something that is going to have a sustainable result, sadly. So finding other ways to encourage and reward innovation in that space and to get the most of their expertise that we don't have in our organization to deliver a better result, I think is really important.
Yes, being agile and different solutions for different suppliers, absolutely. Let's move on to questions. I believe we have a mic available. Any questions from the audience in particular before I move on to some future questions I want to... We have one right at the front here. And a mic is coming to you. You can tell it's the end of the day. I can't run out anymore. My knees can't take it.
Hi guys, thank you very much. Really enjoyed the conversation. I was just going to stay on the technology subject for a small bit and more specifically on the carbon, I guess, measurement and reporting. What kind of tools you guys use and whether you've got any in-house expertise that you're developing in that area, or whether we outsource that?
Okay. So in-house, that would be me and my team. So in terms of tooling, I talked about it earlier, we have a platform that we use that's an NHS developed platform. One of the things that we are incredibly conscious of, and I spoke about this earlier when it comes to platforms, is cost barriers, particularly across a public sector organisation and interconnected organisations. And also what barriers that brings to SMEs who we want to interact with. So it's something very kind of key in our consciousness. But again, it's also, we don't need to overcomplicate this. I think there is a huge plethora of platforms and technologies out there, and it kind of pulls into one of the barriers we see around overwhelm. And actually we need to kind of simplify some of this.
It's very similar, I'm afraid. It's not my area. I'm a sourcing bod, really. But the team that look after it, we're sort of thinking about how we do that. But also, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We've got so many sources of data. We have sort of online, sourcing tools, etc. But how do we pull the data from that into somewhere else, into sort of internal data lakes, and then how do we apply analysis to that? It's still, I don't know. That's a question I want to answer from today, actually. So.
And just kind of building on that, we've just been doing, we've in the midst of some procurement for some of our data and more broadly within the organisation, IT and technological partners. And one of the things I've been looking for in their bid submissions is not about what additional platforms they can give me, but how we use what we've already got. So when you've got a platform like Microsoft, or you've got a platform like Oracle or SAP, whatever it is, that has inbuilt capability. How do we leverage that? Because the more platforms and bits I add on, the more carbon I'm adding to my own kind of footprint.
Put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
I like it. Simplify your IT stack.
I'm not sure if that'd be a best-selling t-shirt range, but we could try it.
Niche.
Absolutely. Chris, anything you wanted to add, or?
I mean, we've got a much more, I guess, complex problem to solve because we work with multiple clients, use multiple systems. When we look at our, when we do the calculations internally for, let's say, the whole life cycle of a project, and that includes building it, repairing it, refurbishing it, renovating it, disposing of it at end of life, which is all quite complicated. We conform generally to the RICS standards. We use some industry standard software like one-click LCA, but we also are innovating internally to work with our cost and commercial teams, for example, who are used to measuring the cost of a project. So why count everything and put a pound value against it if you're then going to count everything again and put a carbon value against it? Yeah. So we're developing tools to integrate the two to be much more efficient, and you put the data in once and you get the two sets of results out.
Yeah, that must be a whole different set of challenges when you are working with a whole different set of systems. Any further questions from the room? Oh, we have one right at the back, Izzy. If you just pop your hand up again, just so Izzy can see where you are. Thank you.
Hi, this is a question for you. I currently do involvement with the NHS HPFT. Do you know about that team at all in Hertfordshire?
No, sorry, I don't.
Okay, so I'm doing involvement with them, part of the sustainability team. I was just wondering if there's any more involvement projects or anything like that coming for the umbrellas of the NHS supply chain?
So we have a number of programs that are going on. The main kind of driver we have with our customer, who are NHS trusts, is the opportunities page. So literally on our website, we've split our sustainability pages into kind of three. There's what we're doing, opportunities for customers, i.e. all of the products or programs or projects that we're aware of, or case studies of things that you can buy differently. So where there's a better tourniquet or a better kind of leg strap, whatever it is, what are the things you can do now? And then there's third part is on suppliers. So again, what the suppliers need to be aware of, what they need to be able to do. So there is a literally on the website, whenever we get a new case study or an opportunity, that's where it goes.
Okay. Any further questions from the room? Not that I can see. Okay, one last set of questions from me really is looking to the future really. So if we can get our crystal ball out, let's look to the next few years about how you see carbon management evolving in procurement and supply chains over the next few years. Chris, I'll start with you on this one. Your thoughts, how do you see that evolving in the near future?
Yeah, I see a much more kind of joined up and integrated approach taken by organisations, and not limited to procurement, but I think procurement is the major way in which we can, from a sustainability perspective, amplify our effectiveness. So I'd expect the teams to be working in a less siloed way, a much more kind of standardised approach, and I would expect what we're seeing with the real industry-leading clients who are really focused on sustainability just to be filtering through to the wider industry, and I would expect regulation to be coming in to almost force that into place for the stragglers amongst us.
Heidi.
So there was a panel a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to steal something somebody said, which is I'm making it personal, and I'm making it personal to our category teams and our category buyers. So what I mean by that is literally for every procurement that we do, they are KPI'd on bringing more sustainable opportunities to market, making more of the total framework output sustainable, and their bonus is going to be based on it.
It's amazing what an impact that can have sometimes. Pat, I'll give you the last word on this.
That sounds slightly terrifying and slightly ominous, but I like it. I think it's kind of where we need to go. It's interesting because I'm thinking the same sort of thing. I think between that kind of, it's going to become much more integrated. It's going to be much more business as usual. As we develop, everybody starts to get to know their own businesses, the data is going to get better. We're going to get a better understanding. So everybody's scope 3 which is like 1, 2, and then 3, is hopefully going to be 1, 2, and then 3, which will then help us all bring that number down. If we all focus on our scope 1 and 2 and get a handle on that as our individual businesses, sort your own house out, and then that will help everybody else. I did want to make a point about, I think, not just carbon, that widening of the ESG agenda into things like modern slavery and biodiversity, and looking at a project in the round and in the whole, and its impact in the whole and in the round. And just, I'm really focusing on the savings and the efficiency. Like, don't just buy something because it's going to do X or have this promise of doing Y. What have we already got? What do we already use? How can we reuse something we've already bought? How do we redeploy something? So those are kind of what I think is the next sort of 5 years.
Thank you very much, and I enjoyed how scientific that diagram was, the 1, 2, and 3. That was also beautifully scientific. That seems like a lovely place for us to round things up on this conversation. After the next very short break, we're talking driving sustainable procurement with technology, the power of data. We've talked about data a lot today. AI and the business data cloud, that is with SAP Business. That'll be in a moment or two. But for now, I thank you for the panel who have been discussing the Carbon Management Forum. Pat, Chris, and Heidi, thank you all.